Welcome to Noir Intellect. I'm your host, Adrian Cole, tonight. The truth refuses to stay buried. If you enjoy the journey into mystery, don't forget to like and subscribe to Noir Intellect and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Now, the mystery begins.
Chapter 1. The Suitcase Nobody Owned. At 11:10 on Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang with the confidence of a man bringing either trouble or a bill. Since bills came by mail, I went to the front door expecting trouble. The woman on the stoop looked too orderly for the weather. Rain had darkened her grey coat, her hat was straight, and her face suggested years of making other people behave. "Mr. Nero Wolfe?" she asked. "You have reached his house. Reaching him is another matter. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I manage the Hawthorne Apartments. Anyone managing a building full of wealthy New Yorkers would either develop authority or flee to a farm." I took her coat and led her into the office. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, where no human interruptions were permitted. I gave Mrs. Marsh the red leather chair and told her he would be down at 11. At 11 exactly the elevator hummed, and Wolfe entered in a brown suit and yellow shirt. He crossed to his desk, settled into his custom-made chair and regarded our visitor. "Mrs. Marsh has a problem." "Most people do," Wolfe said. "Few are worth discussing, Mrs." Marsh met his eyes. "For 3 days, a large brown suitcase has been standing in the main hallway of my building." Wolfe looked at me. "I did not invite it," I said. "Have it removed," he told her. I tried. "No one admits owning it. Then call the police. The police bring reporters. My tenants dislike reporters more than they dislike criminals. That is not my concern." It appeared on the evening Victor Langley held a private gathering in his penthouse. One of Wolfe's eyebrows moved. Victor Langley collected paintings, rare silver, carved figures and enemies. "Who attended?" Wolfe asked. "Martin Hale, his business partner. Douglas Pierce, his attorney. Ruth Bennett, a gallery owner. Thomas Reed, his financial advisor. A messenger also delivered a parcel, and the suitcase? It was not there at 6:30, it was there by 8:40. No doorman saw it arrive. No elevator operator carried it. No guest claims it. Perhaps it walked in. That is less foolish than some answers I have received." Wolfe leaned back. "Describe it." "Brown leather, large, expensive, no initials or travel labels. Both locks are fastened, it is heavy. You lifted it?" "By the handle only." "I did not move it." "Why not?" "Because someone left this on my desk." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a white card printed in block letters. "Leave Suitcase where it is." Wolfe read it. An instruction without authority. It was placed inside my locked office. I sat straighter. "Who has keys?" Wolfe asked. "My assistant, the chief porter, and Victor Langley." Mr. Langley insisted on access after a water leak damaged one of his paintings. "Did you ask him about the suitcase?" "Yes. He said it was not his and told me to throw it away." "Did any guests return after the gathering?" "Thomas Reed came Wednesday morning. Martin Hale came yesterday afternoon." Wolfe's finger traced a circle on his chair arm. "How much do you propose to pay for relief from this nuisance, Mrs.?" Marsh named a figure that converted the nuisance into employment. "Archie," Wolfe said. "Inspect it after lunch. Do not open it." "Why not?" "Because its contents are less useful at present than the behavior of those who believe they know its contents." After lunch, which featured Shad Roe and Wolfe's opinion of American mustard, I took a taxi to Park Avenue. The Hawthorne was grey stone and polished brass. The suitcase stood beside a narrow table near the elevators. It was good brown leather, well kept and almost free of travel scars. Both locks were shut. There were no initials, no labels, and no marks where either had been removed. A blue wool thread clung under the handle. I lifted it with my pocket knife and folded it into an envelope. Around the left keyhole was a pale smear. "Has anyone tried a key?" I asked. "Not with my permission." I scraped a speck. It felt like wax. Carl Ames, the doorman on duty during Langley's gathering, remembered the guests. Martin Hale carried nothing. Ruth Bennett had a small handbag. Douglas Pierce brought a briefcase. Thomas Reed carried folded papers. A young messenger delivered a flat parcel at 7:55. "Did anyone use the service door?" I asked. A florist delivered white lilies, and 2 kitchen men brought food. The inner door remained open, That gave the suitcase a route. The elevator operator, Peter Sloan, remembered more. Ruth Bennett left first. Thomas Reed came down next and stopped when he saw the suitcase. He asked whether anyone had been traveling. Sloan said. Did he touch it? No. He walked around it. Anyone else react? Mr. Hale laughed and said someone had packed a body. Charming. The service corridor and from a side entrance to the lobby without passing the main desk. Anyone familiar with the building could have used it. A maid had seen Hale near the suitcase the next afternoon. Another employee had seen Reed watching it from the mailboxes. At 4:20 I telephoned Wolfe. Good suitcase, I reported. No labels, wax around one lock, and a blue wool thread under the handle. The service entrance was open during Langley's party. Reed noticed the suitcase when he left. Hale made a joke about a body. Both returned later. Have you spoken with Langley? Not yet. Do so. Mrs. Marsh called the penthouse. No answer. She tried again. His valet should be there, she said. Then we will wake his sense of duty. The elevator opened on a private hall smelling of lilies. Mrs. Marsh rang twice, then used her management key. A vase of white lilies stood beneath a gilt mirror. Beyond it lay a sitting room, a library, and a study with one door partly open. Mr. Langley? She called. Only a clock answered. Victor Langley sat in a leather chair beside his desk. His head rested against the back, his eyes were half open, and one hand hung toward the carpet. A glass of amber liquid stood near his elbow. Beside it were a silver pillbox, a fountain pen, and a small brass key. Mrs. Marsh stopped in the doorway. I touched Langley's neck. There was nothing worth reporting to a doctor in a hurry. He is dead, I said. Do not touch anything. There was no wound. A white lily petal lay near his shoe. The brass key was narrow and flat, the sort used for luggage. I called the police then. Wolfe. Langley is dead in his study. It may be his heart, but there is a small brass key on the desk that looks suitable for a suitcase. Has it been touched? No. See that no one opens the suit. Bring it here unopened if possible. Kramer may object. Inspector Kramer regards objection as exercise. He hung up. Kramer arrived with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins and a medical examiner. He found me in the study. Goodwin, he said. Naturally. I enjoy being expected. The medical examiner said heart failure was possible, but the glass and pills would need testing. Kramer had them bagged with the brass key. In the lobby, he stood over the suitcase. Open it. Wolfe wants it left shut. Kramer turned slowly. Does he? He thinks opening it here may destroy its value. And I take orders from Wolfe. No, but you enjoy proving him wrong. That delayed him. The suitcase was photographed and dusted. The handle yielded blurred prints. A technician confirmed the pale substance around the lock was modeling wax. Someone made an impression of the keyhole, I said. Kramer glared. I know what wax is for. At 6:30 he agreed to take the suitcase to the brownstone, mainly because he wanted to watch Wolfe discover laundry. Fritz admitted us with deep disapproval. Wolfe sat behind his desk with a bottle of beer and a glass. The suitcase was placed on the long table. Kramer dropped the sealed evidence envelope beside it. The key from Langley's desk. The technician tried it. It entered one lock halfway and stopped. Wrong key, Kramer said. Wolfe opened his eyes. A false key. What is the difference? A wrong key is selected by accident. A false key is planted with purpose. The technician opened the locks with tools and raised the lid. Inside lay a dark blue overcoat, grey gloves, oilcloth, an empty glass bottle, letters tied with black cord, and a wrapped miniature portrait. I compared the blue thread with the sleeve of the coat. The colour and weave matched. The person who carried the suitcase wore that coat, I said. Or handled it, Kramer replied. Wolfe pointed toward the waxed lock. Someone made or intended to make a key for this suitcase. Someone placed a useless key beside Langley's body to connect him with it. Whether those acts were committed by one person remains to be seen. Kramer lifted the packet of letters with gloved fingers. What are these? Wolfe studied the miniature. It showed a young woman with dark eyes and a determined mouth. A date from 25 years earlier was written on the back. These objects were brought for a private meeting, Wolfe said. The suitcase was left in the lobby because the plan was interrupted. By Langley's death? No, Langley's death was part of the interruption. Kramer shifted his unlit cigar. You have had it open for 1 minute. 1 minute is ample when others have spent 3 days lying. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, arrange interviews with Martin Hale, Douglas Pierce, Ruth Bennett, and Thomas Reed. One of them recognized this suitcase on Tuesday night. One knew why it had been brought, and one has decided that Victor Langley was safer dead than questioned. Rainwater still shone black on West 35th Street. The brown suitcase sat open beneath the office lights, no longer ownerless and no longer harmless. 3 days earlier, it had been an inconvenience in a hallway. Now it was the only witness willing to speak. Chapter 2. Death in the penthouse murder improves a building's memory. Before Victor Langley died, no one at the Hawthorne apartments could remember who had carried a large brown suitcase through the lobby. By 9 the next morning, 3 tenants remembered seeing it arrive. 2 maids had heard suspicious footsteps, and an elderly gentleman on the 6th floor was prepared to swear that the owner had been a left-handed woman wearing a green veil. Unfortunately, the elderly gentleman had spent Tuesday evening in Philadelphia. Inspector Kramer telephoned the brownstone at 8:20 while I was finishing breakfast. Wolfe was already in the plant rooms. Following the morning schedule, the earthquakes, wars, and murderers were expected to respect. "Get over to the Hawthorne," Kramer said. "The medical examiner has something." "I have several things, including coffee. Bring your notebook." He hung up before I could explain that my notebook went where I went, without police instruction. The suitcase remained in Wolfe's office, under lock and key. Its contents had been photographed, listed, and returned to their original positions. Kramer had taken the empty bottle, gloves, and packet of letters for examination, but Wolfe had insisted that the overcoat and miniature portrait stay in the suitcase. That arrangement had produced a discussion lasting 19 minutes. Wolfe had won because Kramer wanted his breakfast. I told Fritz where I was going, took my hat, and went out into a clear New York morning. The rain had scrubbed the streets, but had not improved anyone's manners. A taxi carried me to Park Avenue through traffic that regarded red lights as personal suggestions. The Hawthorne had acquired a uniformed policeman at the entrance and a cluster of reporters across the street. The reporters knew Victor Langley was dead, knew the police suspected poison, and knew almost nothing else. That was enough for a full day's work. Kramer was waiting in the penthouse study with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins and a thin medical examiner named Dr. Ellis. Langley's body had been removed, but the chair remained behind the desk. The glass, pillbox, and brass key were gone. White powder marked places where fingerprints had been tested. The room still looked peaceful. That was its worst feature. There had been no overturned chair, no broken glass, and no sign that Langley had tried to reach the telephone. The papers on his desk were aligned. His pen had been capped. The carpet showed no struggle. Kramer pointed his cigar at Dr. Ellis. "Tell him." Dr. Ellis looked at me as though I were a student who had entered the wrong classroom. "Mr. Langley died from poisoning," he said. "The substance appears to have been aconitine. I knew enough to dislike the word. Fast? It can be. The effects depend upon the dose and method of administration. Numbness, weakness, irregular heartbeat, collapse. Death may resemble sudden cardiac failure." Would he have known he was poisoned? Possibly. He may first have believed he was ill. Kramer said. The mineral water in the glass contained traces. I looked at the place where the glass had stood. So someone poured poison into his drink. "Maybe," Kramer said, "or coated the rim, or put it in something that was later washed into the water. We are waiting for the laboratory." "When did he die?" "Between 10 Tuesday night and 2 Wednesday morning." That stopped me. "Tuesday night?" I asked. Dr. Ellis nodded. "The condition of the body supports that range. The valet's statements about seeing Mr. Langley alive later are unreliable. Victor Langley had been dead for nearly 3 days while his suitcase stood downstairs, pretending to be luggage." I said. "Mrs. Marsh spoke to him Wednesday morning." "By telephone," Kramer replied. "She heard a man's voice. She assumed it was Langley. Who else could imitate him? That is what you and Wolfe are going to tell me." I walked around the desk. The chair was large, with a high leather back. From the doorway, a person might have seen only Langley's head and one shoulder. Anyone entering briefly could have mistaken the body for a sleeping man. What did the valet say? I asked. Edward Finch claims he last saw Langley alive at 11:15 Tuesday night. He says Langley was sitting here, drinking mineral water and reading letters. The letters from the suitcase? Kramer's cigar moved. We do not know. Wolfe may. Wolfe always may. That is different from does. Dr. Ellis left us, and Pearlie went to speak with the fingerprint men. Kramer lowered his voice. The poison could have been given during the party. It might have taken time to kill him. Everyone who attended had access to food or drink. Who poured the mineral water? Finch says Langley poured it himself from a sealed bottle. Where is the bottle? In the kitchen recycling bin, with 6 others, all handled by half the staff. Convenient, murderers often are. I examined the room again. On a side table stood a tray with 4 clean glasses and an empty space where a 5th had probably been. A cabinet held bottles of spirits. But Langley had apparently preferred mineral water. The white lilies in the entrance hall had begun to brown along the edges. Any connection between the poison and the empty bottle from the suitcase? I asked. The laboratory has it. That means you do not know. That means I will know before Wolfe does. He said it with confidence, but not enough to bet money. We found Eleanor Marsh in her office downstairs. She looked as if she had slept in a chair and blamed the chair. Mr. Goodwin, she said. The reporters are telephoning every tenant. That gives them something to discuss besides rent. She did not appreciate it. Kramer asked her to repeat the call she had made to the penthouse on Wednesday morning. I telephoned shortly after 9, she said. A man answered. What did he say? I asked whether the suitcase belonged to Mr. Langley or one of his guests. He said, it is not mine. Remove it if it disturbs you. Then he ended the call. You were certain it was Langley at the time. And now? She hesitated. The voice was lower than usual. I thought he had just awakened. Could it have been the valet? No, Mr. Finch speaks softly. This voice was firm. Martin Hale, I asked. She considered it. Possibly, though I cannot be certain. Douglas Pierce, also possible. Thomas Reed, he speaks more quickly. Someone imitating Langley. That may be what I heard. Kramer asked who had access to the penthouse. After the gathering, Mrs. Marsh gave him a short list. Langley, Finch, the cleaning maid, and Douglas Pierce had regular keys. Martin Hale had once possessed one, but claimed to have returned it months earlier. A management key was held in her locked office, which Victor Langley could enter, I said. Her face tightened. Yes. That explained how the warning card had reached her desk, if Langley had placed it there before his death, or if someone using his key had done it afterward. Kramer left to question Finch again. I stayed with Mrs. Marsh and asked about the guests. Martin Hale had been Langley's business partner for 12 years. Their partnership involved property investments, private loans, and the purchase of artwork for resale. 2 weeks earlier, building employees had heard them arguing in the penthouse. About what? I asked. A waterfront development, Mrs. Marsh said. Hale accused Langley of withdrawing money without approval. How loud? Loud enough for the elevator operator to hear through a closed door. Ruth Bennett owned a gallery on Madison Avenue. Langley had financed 2 exhibitions for her and was considering funding an expansion. According to Mrs. Marsh, Bennett had arrived at Tuesday's gathering nervous and left angry. Douglas Pierce had been Langley's attorney for nearly 20 years. He handled contracts, estates, tax matters, and anything Langley preferred not to discuss in public. And Thomas Reed? I asked. His financial advisor. He manages several of Mr. Langley's accounts. Mr. Langley kept his affairs divided among banks and firms. He trusted no one with the whole picture. Healthy instinct. Poor result. Mrs. Marsh told me the building's security company had collected the lobby recordings. The Hawthorne had cameras at the main entrance, service entrance, elevators, and rear corridor. The system was not modern, but it worked. I found Kramer in a small staff room watching grey images on a monitor. A technician ran the recording from Tuesday night. At 7:10, Martin Hale entered through the main door in a dark overcoat. The picture was grainy, but the coat appeared blue or black. Hale carried nothing. Ruth Bennett arrived at 7:25. Douglas Pierce came 5 minutes later with a briefcase. Thomas Reed arrived at 7:40 carrying a narrow document case. At 7:54, a messenger entered with a flat parcel. He went up, returned 3 minutes later, and left empty-handed. The service entrance showed florists, kitchen workers, and staff moving in and out until 9. At 9:17, the inner service door was left partly open. At 10:43, Ruth Bennett departed. Reed left at 10:51, Pierce at 11:06. Hale came down at 11:28. The suitcase was not visible beside the lobby table. The technician advanced the recording. At 11:58, the screen flickered. A tall decorative column blocked part of the hallway. Behind it, a shadow moved. For perhaps 4 seconds, the lower half of a figure appeared. Dark trousers, polished shoes, a hand gripping a brown leather handle. Then the figure withdrew. When the view cleared, the suitcase stood beside the table. "Run it again," I said. He did. The figure remained hidden above the waist. The column concealed the face and chest. Only the legs, one hand, and the bottom of a dark coat were visible. "Someone knew where the camera was," I said. Kramer grunted. "Or got lucky. No one who carries a heavy suitcase through a marble lobby at midnight depends on luck." The figure had come from the direction of the elevators, not the street entrance. That meant the suitcase had been upstairs before it was placed in the lobby. "Check the elevator recording," I said. The technician did. From 11:45 until midnight, the passenger elevator appeared empty. Then I noticed a small movement near the service elevator. "Back it up." At 11:54, the service elevator doors opened on the lobby level. No person appeared, but the doors remained open 12 seconds longer than usual. "The suitcase came down in the service elevator," I said. "The person stayed behind it or stepped into the service corridor." Kramer looked at the technician. "Get every recording from 11:30 to 12:15. All floors." The technician began copying the film. I telephoned Wolfe from Mrs. Marsh's office. Fritz said Wolfe was in the plant rooms and would not be disturbed until 11. At 11:03, Wolfe came on the line. "Yes, Langley was poisoned with aconitine. Death occurred Tuesday night, probably before 2 in the morning. Mrs. Marsh's Wednesday telephone conversation was with an imposter." Indeed. The suitcase appeared at 11:58. The person placing it knew the camera angle and hid behind a column. It came down in the service elevator. "Did the figure wear an overcoat?" "Yes. Dark and long. Only the lower part is visible. The blue thread could match. Hale arrived in a dark overcoat, but the recording does not give enough color." "Who possessed keys to Langley's apartment?" I told him. "Mr. Pierce had one legally," Wolfe said. "Mr. Hale may have retained one. Mr. Reed could have acquired one through Langley's financial papers. Miss Bennett may have received entry from Langley himself. Access proves little." "What proves more?" "The purpose of the gathering. Kramer is working on it." "Then you must work faster." I looked through the office window at the lobby. The 4 guests had motives ready for display. Hale argued over a failed development. Bennett wanted money. Pierce knew Langley's secrets. Reed controlled the accounts. Motive is abundant. Opportunity is common. Knowledge is scarce. Knowledge of what? The suitcase. Someone knew it would arrive. Someone knew what it contained. Someone knew the gathering would provide an occasion for its delivery. The letters may tell us. The letters are bait or evidence. Possibly both. Learn what Langley expected to discuss Tuesday evening. Obtain the complete sequence of food, drink, arrivals, departures, telephone calls, and private conversations. That is a cheerful afternoon. You are paid. That has never improved an afternoon. Wolfe ignored me. Have Saul Panzer investigate Langley's finances and the history of the woman in the miniature. You will interview the guests. Kramer may object. He will. That is not a reason. I hung up and called Saul. He answered in his quiet voice, which always sounded as though he had known what I wanted before the telephone rang. I gave him the date on the miniature, a description of the woman, and the names of Langley's 4 guests. "Start with Langley's family history," I said. "Then the finances. Wolfe wants secrets, not totals. I'll call when I have something." Kramer entered before I put the receiver down. "Who was that?" "My dentist." "Your dentist investigates old portraits. He is thorough." Kramer placed both hands on Mrs. Marsh's desk. "Stay away from my witnesses. They became Wolfe's witnesses when the suitcase entered his office. They are suspects in a homicide. That makes them more interesting. His jaw worked. The laboratory found traces of aconitine on the stopper of the empty bottle from the suitcase. That was worth sitting up for. The bottle carried the poison? Possibly. There was too little left to prove what it had contained, but the stopper tested positive. So the suitcase brought the poison into the building. Or someone put the bottle in afterward. Why? To point at one of the guests. To hide it. To confuse Wolfe. Pick one. I thought of the gloved hand in the security recording and the figure hiding behind the column. Whoever moved that suitcase knew the camera, I said. Who knows the building well enough? Langley, Finch, Mrs. Marsh, the staff, and any frequent visitor. Hale, Pierce, Reed, or Bennett. All four had been there before. Kramer turned to leave. Where are you going? I asked, to question them. Save me a chair. He gave me a look that would have peeled paint, but I followed him to the elevator. As the doors opened, Thomas Reed stepped into the lobby from the street. He was a narrow man in his middle 40s, with silver at his temples, a dark blue coat, and the careful expression of someone accustomed to explaining large losses in small words. He saw Kramer first, then me. Then the empty space beside the brass table where the suitcase had stood. His face changed, not much. A slight tightening around the mouth and a pause too brief for anyone who was not paid to notice pauses. Mr. Reed, I asked. Yes, I'm Archie Goodwin. I would like to ask about Victor Langley's gathering. He looked again at the empty place. What happened to the suitcase? He asked. Kramer said, Why do you care? Reed's eyes returned to him. I do not, he had answered too quickly. Upstairs, Victor Langley's study waited, with its neat desk, clean carpet, and mineral water glass already on its way to a laboratory. Downstairs, the suitcase was gone, but the people who had feared it were beginning to show themselves. Wolfe had ordered me to learn everything about Tuesday's gathering. Thomas Reed had just given me the first useful fact. He had expected the suitcase to remain exactly where it was. Chapter 3. The Missing Hour. A man who says he remained in one room all evening is either blessed with patience or preparing an alibi. Thomas Reed did not look patient. He stood in the Hawthorne lobby, in his dark blue overcoat, staring at the empty place beside the brass table where the suitcase had stood. Inspector Kramer watched him with the expression he usually reserved for a witness who had stepped on his own tongue. You asked what happened to the suitcase, Kramer said. Why? Reed adjusted one glove. Because it had been standing there for 3 days. Its absence was noticeable. So was Victor Langley's death. Reed's mouth tightened. I came to offer any assistance I could. That is generous, I said. We were just about to ask where you were between 11 and midnight Tuesday. His eyes moved to me. In the library. All hour, as I remember. That is a broad answer for a narrow hour. Kramer jerked his head toward Mrs. Marsh's office. Inside. Reed obeyed. I followed without being invited. Kramer objected, but not strongly enough to make me leave. Thomas Reed sat behind Mrs. Marsh's desk, because Kramer took the visitor's chair and I took the other one. It put Reed in the position of a man conducting business, which may have helped him until he noticed there were no papers to hide behind. He was 45 or 46, narrow through the shoulders, carefully dressed, and pale in the way financial men become pale when their offices are high enough above street level. His dark blue overcoat was good wool. I still had the thread found beneath the suitcase handle. Tell us about Tuesday evening, Kramer said. Reed removed his gloves one finger at a time. Mr. Langley invited me to dinner. The others were already there when I arrived. Dinner ended when? Around 10. What happened afterward? We went to the library. Langley served drinks. There was a discussion of several business matters. What matters? Private investments. Kramer leaned forward. Langley is dead. Privacy is losing ground. Reed looked at me, perhaps hoping I had softer features. Mr. Langley had invested in a waterfront development with Martin Hale. The project was losing money. Hale wanted additional funds. Langley refused. Did they argue? Yes. How badly? Hale accused Langley of taking money from their partnership. Langley called him incompetent. That sounded like the beginning of an ordinary business evening among friends. What did Ruth Bennett want? I asked. funding for her gallery expansion. Did Langley agree? No. He told her he had changed his mind. And Douglas Pierce? Pierce had documents for Langley to sign. What kind? I do not know, Kramer said. Where was everyone between 11 and midnight? Reed thought about it too carefully. Hale left the library to take a telephone call. Miss Bennet went to the terrace. Pierce took documents into the study. I remained with Langley. For the entire hour. I believe so. You believe wrong, I said. Security film shows you leaving the building at 10:51. His face altered. Only slightly, but enough. Kramer turned toward me. I kept my expression innocent. The film had shown Reed leaving at 10:51, but that was useful only if he denied it. Reed said, then I was mistaken about the time. By more than an hour. We had been drinking. What? 1 glass of whiskey. That is a poor excuse, Kramer said. Try another. Reed stood. I have answered your questions. Kramer told him to sit. Reed remained standing. I took the thread envelope from my pocket and placed it on the desk. The suitcase handle held a strand of dark blue wool. Your coat is dark blue wool. So are thousands of coats in New York. True. But most of them did not visit Victor Langley on Tuesday. He looked at the envelope, but did not touch it. I never handled that suitcase. You knew it was supposed to remain in the lobby. I assumed the police had removed it. You asked what happened to it before anyone said the police were involved. His face settled into professional calm. This is absurd. Kramer let him leave after warning him not to leave the city. Reed put on his gloves in the lobby without looking at the empty place again. That was dirty, Kramer told me. The lie about the film. You knew he left at 10:51. He did too. I merely helped him remember. Kramer had no answer suitable for Mrs. Marsh's lobby, so he went upstairs. I started with Martin Hale. He lived in a wide apartment on East 68th Street, with rugs thick enough to conceal small animals. Hale himself was around 50, broad, red-faced, and built as though he had been assembled for a boardroom argument. His suit was dark grey. His temper was visible before I mentioned Langley. I have already spoken with the police, he said. You probably left something out. I left nothing out. That saves time. He invited me into a room containing leather chairs, hunting prints, and a cabinet full of bottles. He did not offer me one. Hale admitted the argument over the waterfront development. He and Langley had invested heavily in warehouses near the river. Langley had removed funds from a joint account without Hale's approval. How much? I asked. Nearly $200,000. That is enough to raise a voice. It was my money as well as his. Did you threaten him? I said I would take him to court. Witnesses heard you say you would destroy him. That was language. Most threats are. He poured himself a drink. I did not kill Victor. Where were you between 11 and midnight? I took a telephone call in the guest bedroom. From whom? My secretary. Name? Grace Nolan. What was so urgent at 11? At night? A contract for the waterfront project. How long was the call? 10 minutes. The elevator operator says you left the building at 11:28. Then I left at 11:28. What happened before that? Hale drank. Pierce went into the study with Langley. Ruth stepped onto the terrace. Reed wandered in and out. I made my call. You told the police Reed stayed in the library. I may have said that. You just said he wandered in and out. Hale glared. It was a social gathering, not a military inspection. Did Langley seem nervous? That changed him. He looked toward the window. Yes. Why? I do not know. Did he check his watch? Several times. Was he expecting someone? Hale took another drink. He told the valet to admit a visitor after 11:30. Who? Did the visitor arrive? Did you see a suitcase in the penthouse? No. Did you use the service elevator? No. When I asked whether he still owned a key to Langley's apartment, he said he had returned it 6 months earlier. He said it too firmly. Ruth Bennett received me at her gallery. She was in her early 40s, elegant without being fragile, with auburn hair and eyes that could estimate the price of anything in the room. Large modern canvases hung on white walls behind her. One looked like a railroad accident involving tomatoes. I suppose Mr. Wolfe sent you, she said. He dislikes Park Avenue before dinner. He dislikes leaving his house. That too. She led me into a private office. Unlike Hale, she offered coffee. Unlike Hale's whiskey, it was worth drinking. Yes, she said. Victor withdrew his offer to finance my expansion. Yes, I was angry. No, I did not poison him. You have organized that efficiently. The police were less charming. They work for the city, she said. Dinner ended shortly after 10. Langley had barely eaten. He kept checking the clock and listening for the elevator bell. He expected someone, she said. Who? He called the person our final guest. Our. That was the word he used. Did anyone ask for a name? Martin did. Victor told him to wait. What happened after 11? Douglas took papers into the study. Martin answered a call. Thomas sat near the fireplace. I went to the terrace. Why? I needed air. How long? Perhaps 15 minutes. Did you see anyone arrive? No. The terrace faces the avenue. Did you see the suitcase upstairs? Her fingers paused on the coffee cup. No, it was a fraction too late. Did Langley show you any old letters or a miniature portrait? Her cup touched the saucer with a small click. No. Do you know a woman whose portrait Victor Langley might have kept for 25 years? No. That answer came faster. I stood. You are a good liar, Miss Bennet. Her eyes hardened. Then perhaps you should prove I lied, Mr. Wolfe usually saves that for company. Douglas Pierce had offices downtown, but I found him in Langley's loyally natural habitat, a private club where the chairs were old and the members older. Pierce was 60, thin, silver-haired, and so controlled that even his wrinkles looked deliberate. He admitted entering the study with Langley at 10:40. What documents? I asked. A revised will and 2 trust agreements. Who benefited? That is confidential. Langley is dead. The privilege survives him. Murder has poor respect for privilege. Pierce did not smile. I remained in the study, approximately 20 minutes. Langley read the documents but did not sign them. Why not? He was waiting for someone. Who? He refused to tell me. What did you do after leaving the study? I returned to the library. Did you see Ruth Bennett? She was on the terrace. Martin Hale, using the telephone. Thomas Reed. Pierce hesitated. I thought he was in the library. Thought. The room was dim. He may have stepped out. Did anyone enter the penthouse after 11? I heard the service elevator. When? A few minutes before I left. You left at 11:06, then shortly before 11. That did not match Langley's instruction to admit someone after 11:30, but memories were moving around the clock as freely as the guests had moved around the penthouse. Did Langley possess confidential files not kept in his office? I asked. Pierce's eyes narrowed. What files? I hoped you would tell me. I cannot. That meant he knew they existed. I returned to the Hawthorne at 4:30 and talked to the servants. The cook remembered Langley eating almost nothing. The maid remembered him checking his watch during dinner. Edward Finch, the valet, remembered too much and told it badly. Mr. Langley expected no one, Finch said. He told you to admit a visitor. I do not recall that. 3 guests recall it. Then perhaps I misunderstood. What happened after they left? I cleared the glasses. Did you use the service? Elevator? No. Who did? No one. Security film shows it opening at 11:54. Finch's face went grey. Then someone summoned it. From which floor? The penthouse is the only private stop above 12. Did the secret visitor arrive by the service entrance? I saw no visitor. He was frightened. But whether of the police, the killer, or the truth was still available for purchase. When I got back to West 35th Street, Wolfe was in the office drinking beer. The Orchids had received 2 hours of his attention. Fritz had received instructions for dinner, and I received a grunt. I reported the interviews. Wolfe sat with his eyes closed while I arranged the missing hour. At 10:40, Pierce entered the study. Around 10:50, Bennett went to the terrace. At 10:51, Reed left the building, though he first claimed to remain in the library. At 11:06, Pierce departed. At 11:15 or later, Hale took a telephone call. At 11:28, Hale left. After 11:30, Langley expected a visitor. At 11:54, the service elevator opened in the lobby. At 11:58, someone placed the suitcase behind the decorative column. Nobody accounts clearly for anyone else, I said. They all describe an evening where everyone was somewhere and no one was seen. Wolfe opened his eyes. Because they are protecting separate secrets, or one shared secret. No, shared lies are smoother. These collide. The telephone rang. It was Saul Panzer. I found the woman in the miniature, he said. I took a pencil. Her name was Margaret Vale. She worked for Langley's father 25 years ago as a private secretary. She disappeared after accusing him of falsifying ownership records for several paintings brought from Europe after the war. What happened to her? No official record after March 1921. She had one daughter, Helen, born the year before. Who was the father? Not listed. What about Langley's files? 2 days before his death, Victor withdrew 4 sealed folders from a private storage vault. The folders concerned the Langley family collection, old partnership accounts, and property transfers dating back 25 years. Where are they now? Missing. They were not in the penthouse or his office. I looked at Wolfe. His eyes had opened fully. Anything else? I asked. The vault attendant says Langley carried the folders away in a large brown suitcase. That was the first solid blow of the day. I repeated it to Wolfe after Saul hung up. Wolfe leaned back and pressed his palms against the arms of his chair. Suitcase entered the building before the gathering, he said. Then the camera only showed it being placed in the lobby after midnight. Precisely. It was already in Langley's apartment. The secret visitor may have brought nothing. He or she came to receive the files, but the files were gone when the suitcase was opened. Someone removed them and replaced them with the overcoat, bottle, letters, and portrait. Before putting the suitcase in the hall. Yes, why leave it there? To create uncertainty, to make each guest wonder what remained inside, and what another person might know. I told him the police had examined the visible contents, but had not cut the lining or inspected the frame. Wolfe frowned. The suitcase was built for expensive travel. Such cases often contain reinforced panels, document sleeves, or false backing. The killer may have overlooked something. It is police evidence. Obtain authority to inspect it completely. You want me to get a warrant? I want the district attorney to authorize a forensic examination before Inspector Kramer permits his laboratory to destroy what it does not understand. That sounds easier when you say it. It is your task, not mine. I telephoned Kramer. He objected for 3 minutes, threatened for 2, and finally admitted the police had not removed the inner lining because the suitcase itself had not yet been formally connected to the homicide. I gave him Saul's information about the vault. The line went quiet. Where did Panzer get that? He asked. By asking people questions. I know how he works. Then you know he is usually right. Kramer said he would speak with the district attorney and obtain the necessary order. He added that the suitcase would be examined at police headquarters, not in Wolfe's office. Wolfe listened to that message and grunted. Archie, he said, you will be present. Kramer may object. He has established the habit. Fritz entered to announce dinner. The aroma of roasted duck followed him, and Wolfe's attention moved toward civilized matters. Mine remained with the missing hour. 4 guests had moved through Langley's penthouse, while he waited for someone who officially never arrived. Confidential files had been carried there in a brown suitcase and vanished before midnight. The poison bottle had been left behind. The suitcase had been placed where every departing guest would eventually hear of it, but no one would dare claim it. Somewhere between 11 and midnight, Victor Langley had held a secret meeting. By the time it ended, the files were gone, the suitcase had lost its owner, and Langley had begun to die. Chapter 4. What the suitcase contained. Inspector Kramer called at 9:13 the next morning and said the suitcase would be opened at police headquarters at 10. I reminded him that it had already been opened. It has been unlocked, he said. Today the lining comes out. An important distinction. Bring Wolfe. That was unreasonable enough to deserve respect. You may bring the building instead, I told him. He has an appointment with 10,000 orchids. Kramer said something about orchids that would have offended them, then ordered me to arrive on time. At 9:30 Wolfe came down from the plant rooms and entered the office with a spray of yellow orchid pollen on one sleeve. I gave him Kramer's message while he inspected the pollen as though it were a breach of discipline. You will attend, he said. I had reached that conclusion. Observe the order in which every object is removed. Record all marks, folds, gaps, and changes in the lining. The police have photographers. Photographs preserve what the camera sees. You are expected to see more. That was flattering until I remembered it meant work. Do you expect the missing files? No. What do you expect? An error. Whose? Whoever arranged the suitcase. No one creates a false account without revealing which truth he fears. At 10:05, I entered a laboratory room at police headquarters and found Kramer already irritated. Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins stood near a long steel table. Two laboratory men in white coats waited beside cameras, tools, evidence envelopes, and the brown suitcase. It looked less impressive beneath hard electric lights. The leather still had dignity, but police laboratories are designed to make every object feel guilty. The contents found during the first opening had been placed in separate evidence bags. The dark blue overcoat lay folded on another table. The grey gloves, empty poison bottle, packet of copied letters, miniature portrait, and square of oilcloth had each received a label and a number. Kramer pointed at the suitcase. Your authorization. He handed me a paper allowing the police to dismantle the case and inspect all concealed spaces. Wolfe had asked for a warrant. Kramer had obtained an order from the district attorney and was determined that nobody call it a favor. Where is Wolfe? He asked. At home, earning your dislike. He wanted this done. He wants many things done. He does not always want to watch. One laboratory man was named Harris. He began with the lid. The inner lining was dark green fabric stretched over a rigid frame. He removed the stitched border slowly, using a narrow blade. Nothing appeared behind it except thin padding and leather. The lower compartment was different. When the suitcase had first been opened, the coat, gloves, letters, bottle, portrait, and oilcloth had seemed to fill it. With those removed, the bottom looked unusually shallow for a case of its size. Harris measured the outside depth, then the inside. 2 3/4 inches missing, he said. Kramer looked at me. Satisfied? I have not had breakfast here, so no. Harris removed 4 brass screws hidden under the corner straps. The false bottom lifted. Beneath it lay a stack of papers. There were no diamonds, banknotes, stolen paintings, or weapons. There was only paper, neatly arranged in flat bundles and secured with cotton tape. Kramer stared at them. Records. Criminals use them, I said. So do governments. Pearlie lifted the first bundle and placed it on clean paper. Harris photographed it before cutting the tape. The documents were ordinary enough to disappoint anyone expecting murder to come printed in red ink. There were handwritten schedules, typed memoranda, copies of correspondence, appointment cards, expense sheets, and pages from financial ledgers. Every bundle carried a month and year. Kramer picked up one schedule. Last January. The next was February. Then March, April, and May. I checked the final bundle. It ended 11 months later, only 3 weeks before Langley's death. An annual diary, I said. Not a diary, Kramer replied. Business records. Victor Langley had offices for business records. He did not need a false-bottom suitcase. We began reading. Langley had met bankers, investors, art dealers, attorneys, city officials, and men whose occupations were described with enough care to conceal them. Most entries were harmless. Lunch with a museum director, dinner with a shipping executive, a conference over warehouse leases, a private viewing at Ruth Bennett's gallery, 3 appointments with Douglas Pierce concerning trusts, 6 meetings with Thomas Reed regarding numbered investment accounts. Martin Hale appeared often, usually beside references to the waterfront project. The documents had been prepared by more than one hand. Some schedules were typed. Others carried Langley's quick, narrow writing. Several pages had pencil annotations from an unknown clerk. Correspondence copies were unsigned, but dates and initials connected them to the appointments. At first, the papers looked like an archive assembled by a man who mistrusted memory. Then I saw the repeated phrase. On a schedule dated February 14, an entry at 8:30 read, VL with DP and second guest, private study. On a March expense sheet, car sent for second guest. Charge personally to VL. A memorandum from May, no record in household book. Second guest to use service entrance. Documents held pending approval of second guest. In September, RB. Present first half hour. Second guest afterward. Placed the page there. Here is someone shy. Kramer came over. Who? Second guest. We searched the remaining bundles. The phrase appeared 14 times in 11 months. Never with a full name. Sometimes Langley met the second guest alone. Sometimes Douglas Pierce attended. Ruth Bennett appeared twice. Thomas Reed appeared once beside a discussion of investment transfers. Martin Hale's initials did not appear on any page containing the phrase. The second guest always arrived after normal business hours. The meetings were usually held in Langley's study. 3 used the service entrance. Twice a car was sent, but no destination was recorded, Pearlie said. Could be the same person every time. It could be a position, Kramer said. Different people, same label. I studied the dates. Then why capitalize it? Neither answered. At 11:15, I called Wolfe. He had finished his morning session with the orchids and was in the office. I described the hidden compartment and the documents. You are reading them in sequence, he asked. Yes, do not merely search for the repeated phrase. Note what is absent before and after each occurrence. There are meetings with someone called second guest. How many? 14. Names connected. Pierce several times, Bennett twice. Reed once. Hale never. Dates? I gave them to him. He made a small sound. What? I asked. Pages are missing. I looked at the papers spread across the table. You have not seen them. I do not need to. An archive intentionally concealed for a year would not contain 14 references to an unidentified person unless the identification had been removed. That is what we are checking. Check the page numbers, staple marks, and continuity of dates. Also determine whether the papers were assembled by Langley or by someone using his records. Anything else? Return before lunch. It is nearly 11:30. Then proceed with competence. He hung up. Kramer had listened from 3 feet away. What did he say? That you should offer me a sandwich. We examined the documents more carefully. The first gap appeared in the March bundle. The typed schedule numbered its pages in the lower corner. Pages 1 through 4 were present. Page 5 was gone. Page 6 began with a reference to a revised agreement approved after a meeting with the second guest. The missing page had not fallen out. Its edge had been cut cleanly near the binding holes. In May, a correspondence sequence jumped from letter 12 to letter 14. In July, a ledger page showed entries numbered 301 through 318. The next page began at 326. In September, half a typed memorandum had been torn away. The surviving lower section contained only the last lines, identity not to be disclosed without written consent. Original title records remain protected. Second guest accepts personal responsibility. By noon we had found 9 missing pages or sections. Every removal concerned a meeting involving the second guest. Kramer paced around the table. Someone hid an archive and then censored it. Carefully, I said. They left enough to show the meetings existed. Maybe Langley removed the pages himself. Then why preserve the references? To threaten someone or protect himself? Pearlie held up one of them. Monthly bundles. The tape is new. Harris examined it. The cotton tape around every packet had been cut from the same roll. The paper was less than a year old, but the knots had been tied recently. Dust patterns along the document edges showed that the pages had been stored loose or in folders before being bundled. The archive had been assembled shortly before it entered the suitcase, Kramer said. Langley took the old files from storage 2 days before he died. He could have sorted them and packed these papers, except the 4 sealed folders Saul traced are still missing. He may have removed what he wanted and destroyed the rest. Then who added the poison bottle and the coat? Kramer looked at the overcoat. The laboratory had compared the thread from the handle with the sleeve. The fibers were similar, but not conclusive. The coat had no tailor's label. Its pockets were empty, and its lining had been cleaned with a chemical solvent. The grey gloves carried no usable fingerprints. The poison bottle had traces of aconitine around the stopper, but almost none inside, suggesting it had been rinsed. The copied letters concerned Margaret Vale and accusations against Langley's father. They mentioned false ownership records, pressure placed on witnesses, and a payment made to silence someone. None carried an original signature. The miniature portrait showed Margaret Vale at about 25. Everything visible was selected. To point backward, I said. The woman, the old scandal, the poison bottle, the unmarked coat. Everything hidden points to meetings during the last year. Kramer stopped pacing. 2 different people packed it. or one person wanted us to believe two different stories. At 12:20, the documents were ready for transport to the brownstone. Kramer objected to letting them leave police custody. Wolfe objected by telephone to discussing them anywhere else. They reached a compromise that made neither happy. Kramer, Pearlie, and I carried copies to West 35th Street. The originals remained at headquarters under guard. Fritz admitted us and informed me in a low voice that lunch had been delayed 9 minutes. He made it sound like a death in the family. Wolfe sat behind his desk with the monthly packets arranged on the long table before him. He had already been served beer. Kramer refused the red leather chair and stood. "There," he said, "an archive. You were right about the false bottom. Do not celebrate." "I rarely celebrate facts," Wolfe replied. "They are usually unpleasant." He began with January and worked forward. Wolfe does not read as other men read. His eyes take possession of a page. He turned the sheet slowly, pausing over dates, initials, alterations, and gaps. I gave him my notes on the missing pages. After 20 minutes, he leaned back. "Whoever assembled this was neither preserving Langley's business history nor hiding it," he said. Kramer folded his arms. "Then what was he doing? Editing it? That is obvious." "No, the purpose of the editing is not obvious." Wolfe tapped the February schedule. A man wishing to conceal the second guest would remove every reference. A man wishing to expose the second guest would include the name. Here we have neither. The references remain, but the identity has been excised. "Blackmail," Kramer said. "Possibly, but blackmail requires a recipient. This suitcase was left in a public hallway and disowned, so someone wanted the police to find it. Eventually, but not before the guests had time to see it and fear it. I pulled a chair closer. The suitcase sat there 3 days. Everyone from the gathering passed it or heard about it. Yes, it was an announcement without a message." Kramer's cigar remained unlit between his fingers. "What announcement?" "That evidence existed." "Evidence of what?" Wolfe pointed toward the records. "A series of clandestine meetings involving Langley and an unnamed participant. These papers prove the meetings occurred, but do not disclose their full purpose. The missing pages contained the dangerous facts. Then the killer took them. Perhaps. You keep saying perhaps. You keep supplying conclusions before they are earned." Kramer's face reddened. "Langley withdrew 4 confidential folders. He was poisoned. The folders disappeared. These papers were placed in his suitcase, with gaps where the important information should be. What conclusion would you like?" "That the visible conclusion may have been designed for you." That slowed Kramer. Wolfe selected 3 pages and placed them side by side. One concerned an April meeting with Douglas Pierce and the second guest. Another concerned a July transfer reviewed by Thomas Reed. The third concerned Ruth Bennett's presence at a September meeting. "Notice the wording," Wolfe said. "Pierce was present to advise. Reed was present to calculate. Miss Bennett was present only for the first portion. Each knew the second guest existed. None necessarily knew the whole arrangement." "And Hale?" I asked. "His absence is conspicuous," Kramer said. Meaning? "Either Hale knew nothing of the meetings, or every reference connecting him was removed." Wolfe turned to the ledgers. The financial pages included payments for cars, private meals, document copying, and storage charges. Several sums had no recipient, only the initials SG. The amounts were not large enough to be bribes by Langley's standards, but they were regular. "Someone was being maintained," I said. "Or reimbursed," Wolfe replied. One ledger entry concerned the rental of a private safe deposit compartment. Another mentioned an annual payment to a legal trust created 25 years earlier, the same period connected to Margaret Vale. Kramer pointed to it. "The old woman again." "She was not old in the portrait," Wolfe said severely. "She may also be irrelevant. She is in the suitcase. So is an overcoat. Objects can be planted together without becoming related." Wolfe closed his eyes. The room settled around him. Traffic moved beyond the windows. Fritz passed through the hall toward the kitchen, where lunch waited with increasing disapproval. Kramer shifted his weight. Pearlie examined the ceiling. I read the September memorandum again. Identity not to be disclosed without written consent. Original title records remain protected. Second guest accepts personal responsibility. Wolfe opened his eyes. The suitcase was not luggage, he said. It was an archive constructed for an audience. Which audience? Kramer demanded. Two audiences. First, the people who attended Langley's gathering. They were meant to see it and wonder what it contained. Second, the authorities, who were meant to open it after Langley's death. Why leave some pages and remove others? To preserve the existence of the secret while controlling its meaning. I said, someone wanted the meetings discovered, but not the identity of the second guest. Correct, Kramer grunted. That sounds like protection. It may be protection. It may also be pressure. The unnamed person now knows that records exist. The other guests know the same. Each must wonder who possesses the missing pages. Who packed it? I asked. Wolfe looked at the copies of the letters, the dark coat, and the photograph of the false compartment. Not Langley alone. He expected a meeting Tuesday night. He had withdrawn the original files. Someone came for them. That person, or another who interrupted them, repacked the suitcase after removing selected pages. Kramer said, "You think the secret visitor killed him. I think the secret visitor existed. That is not enough. No. But it is more than we possessed yesterday." Wolfe tapped the repeated phrase with one thick forefinger. Second guest is not a casual label. It is a title agreed upon by people who feared a name on paper. Find who first used it, and we shall know why Victor Langley was waiting. Kramer asked how. Question the typist who prepared these schedules. Trace the car charges, identify the safe deposit compartment. Determine which trust received the annual payments. Also compare the cut edges of the missing pages with every paper recovered from Langley's study, fireplace, and waste containers. Kramer bristled. You are giving orders again. I am offering relief from confusion. Kramer took the copies and left with Pearlie, promising nothing. When the door closed, Fritz appeared and announced that the food could wait no longer without injury. Wolfe rose, but I remained at the table. One page from the August schedule had a faint indentation near the missing section. Someone had written on the page above it with enough pressure to leave a trace. Under the office lamp I could make out part of a line. Second guest to bring proof. The final word was lost beneath the cut edge I showed Wolfe. He studied it and grunted. Proof of what? I asked. That is what someone murdered Langley to obtain, conceal, or destroy. He moved toward the dining room. Are you coming? I asked. I am going to lunch. The suitcase has just produced a secret participant, 9 missing pages, a hidden trust, and proof of something worth killing for, none of which will improve cold food. I followed him because Fritz had prepared sweetbreads, and because experience had taught me that Wolfe often thought best while eating something the rest of us could not pronounce without practice. Behind us, the copied records covered the long table. They told us where Victor Langley had gone, whom he had met, what he had paid, and when he had lied. They told us everything except the one fact their unknown editor had taken pains to remove: the name of the second guest. Chapter 5. The secret meeting. Nero Wolfe treated facts as Fritz treated ingredients. He disliked them badly cut, carelessly mixed, or served in the wrong order. At 11:30 the morning after the hidden archive was found, Wolfe sat behind his desk with beer at hand. Saul Panzer occupied the yellow chair. The sequence, Wolfe said. I gave it to him. Langley had withdrawn 4 confidential folders 2 days before his death. On Tuesday night he held a small gathering and expected an unnamed visitor after 11:30. Before midnight he was poisoned. The original files disappeared. His suitcase was repacked with misleading objects and an edited archive, then placed in the Hawthorne lobby where every guest could see it and no one dared claim it. 14 entries mention the second guest. I finished. 9 related pages were removed. What have you found by rereading them? A warehouse. I put 6 pages before him. The same waterfront address appeared in car charges, expense sheets, and private schedules. It was an unused warehouse at Pier 46, called Building C in Langley's notes. One entry read, VL, and second guest, Building C, review original titles. Another said, TR to arrange access. Second guest at 9. The last, dated 2 weeks before Langley's death, was less comfortable. VL. Requests proof at Building C. Second guest refuses delay. Wolfe read them and turned to Saul. The property. Saul removed a folded sheet from his pocket. East Borough Storage Corporation owns it. Eastborough is owned by Meridian Holdings. Meridian's voting shares are held by a trust controlled by Thomas Reed. When was it acquired? Wolfe asked. 14 months ago, 1 month before the first second guest meeting. The seller was tied to one of Langley's investment accounts. Then, Langley supplied the property and Reed concealed it. Visit the warehouse. Saul rose. I said, I'll go with him. No, bring Mr. Reed here. Thomas Reed refused twice. On the third attempt, I informed Douglas Pierce that Wolfe intended to give Inspector Kramer the warehouse records before dinner. Reed arrived at 4:20. He sat in the red leather chair. Mr. Pierce said you had information concerning Victor's estate, he said. He was imprecise, Wolfe replied. I have information concerning Victor Langley's murder. Then it belongs with the police. They have portions. They will receive more if you continue lying. Wolfe placed the warehouse entries before him. You controlled access to Building C. Langley, met the second guest there repeatedly. Explain. Read the pages. Victor stored investment materials there. What materials? Records and equipment connected with development projects. Name one project. There were several. Name one. Reed's face tightened. Some matters remain confidential, not if they conceal murder. You lied about remaining in Langley's library. You denied prior knowledge of the suitcase. You now conceal a property used for secret meetings. Your devotion to privacy is becoming theatrical. Reed leaned forward. I did not kill Victor. That is a denial, not an explanation. After a pause, he admitted that Langley stored papers concerning disputed artwork. Several paintings acquired by Langley's father after the war had uncertain ownership records. Claims against them could have ruined the collection. Margaret Vale accused Langley's father of falsifying those records, Wolfe said. Yes. What was stored at the warehouse? Copies of bills of sale, shipping records, photographs, and letters. Victor trusted neither his office nor his penthouse. Why use a property hidden behind your companies? He believed someone had discovered his secure vault. The second guest? Possibly. Did you meet that person? No. The archive places you at one meeting. It places my initials beside an expense. Wolfe selected a ledger page. $40,000 was transferred after a meeting involving Langley, you, and the second guest. I prepared the transfer. To whom? A consulting company called North Harbor Advisory. Who owned it? I do not know. I said, you managed the account. I followed written instructions. From Langley? Yes. Then why hide your part? Because the transactions could be misunderstood. The doorbell rang. Saul entered carrying waterfront dust on his coat and a paper packet in one hand. Found behind a loose board in the warehouse office, he said. The police should take it from here. Reed lost color. Inside the packet was a torn strip of cream paper containing 3 typed lines. Second guest will receive the originals upon final payment. TR guarantees transfer through North Harbor. If either party fails, VL retains copies for protection. Wolfe read it, then looked at Reed. Your ignorance has become tiresome. Reed stared at Saul. You had no right to enter. The side door was open, Saul said calmly. Wolfe tapped the fragment. What was being purchased? Documents. What documents? Proof that certain paintings in the Langley collection had been obtained through false claims. The original owners or their heirs could have demanded their return. Who possessed the proof? I never knew. The second guest. That was Victor's name for the person. Man or woman? I do not. You transferred $40,000 to an unknown person through North Harbor. Another bank concealed the owner. Did the payment purchase silence? Reed looked toward the window. It purchased time. For whom? For everyone. That sounded like his first honest answer. He explained that Langley had learned someone possessed original ownership records. At first, the person demanded money. Later, the demand changed, but Langley stopped sharing details. He began copying schedules and financial records. He told Reed no associate would betray him if he could prove they had all participated. Participated in what? I asked. Moving money, creating companies, concealing property. Some transactions were legal, some were not. Victor made sure each advisor signed something, approved something, or witnessed something. The archive was leverage, Wolfe said. Yes, an insurance policy against betrayal. Reed glanced at the sealed suitcase near the long table. That was how Victor thought. Loyalty was an expense. Evidence was security. You knew the suitcase contained the policy. I knew he had assembled records. I did not know where he placed them. But you feared the suitcase in the lobby. I suspected what it might contain. Did you return to the Hawthorne after leaving at 10:51? No. Did you move the missing files? No. Did you provide the O'Connor team? No. Wolfe leaned back. Langley bound Hale, Bennett, Pierce, and you to questionable transactions. If one exposed him, all might fall. But the second guest held something Langley needed. That person was not merely another accomplice. Reed stood Wolfe. Allowed it. Before you go, Wolfe said, what did Langley say to you on Tuesday? Reed paused at the door. He said that by midnight he would no longer need insurance. What did you think he meant? I asked. That the original documents would be returned. And now, Reed looked at the suitcase. Now I think he meant someone would no longer be able to betray him. After Reed left, Saul described Building C. The main floor was empty. A locked office contained a table, 6 chairs, an old telephone, and a steel cabinet recently cleared. In a waste burner, he found pieces of black cotton tape matching the ties around the archive bundles. The papers were sorted there, I said. Or censored there, Saul replied. Wolfe nodded. The warehouse was the workshop. Langley brought the original files. Someone selected what the authorities would eventually see, removed the dangerous pages, and packed the suitcase. The telephone rang. Kramer had received preliminary banking records. More than $300,000 had moved through North Harbor into accounts linked to Eastborough Storage, Ruth Bennett's gallery expansion, Hale's waterfront project, and a trust administered by Douglas Pierce. Every known guest had touched the same money. When I repeated it, Wolfe grunted. Langley constructed a chain, he said. If one link broke, all would be exposed. Blackmail, partly. Fraud, certainly, and that the second guest, still protected by the missing pages. I looked at the warehouse fragment. Why would anyone leave an edited insurance policy in a public hallway? To frighten the living and expose the dead. Langley no longer cared. Wolfe selected the final warehouse entry, VL. Requests proof at Building C. Second guest, refuses delay. The secret meeting Tuesday night was meant to settle the matter, he said. Langley expected the original evidence. Instead he died. The files vanished, and his archive was displayed where every associate would wonder what remained inside. Placed by the killer? Possibly. Or by someone who feared the killer. Wolfe looked at Saul. Find the true owner of North Harbor. Then he looked at me. Obtain every telephone call to and from Langley's penthouse between 11 and midnight Tuesday. You think the missing visitor called first? No one carrying evidence worth $300,000 enters a building without learning whether the path is safe. Outside, evening settled over West 35th Street. The suitcase remained under police seal, filled with records chosen to survive and gaps designed to frighten. Victor Langley had built an insurance policy against betrayal. Someone had collected on it with poison. Chapter 6. The man behind the records. The trouble with examining evidence for several hours is that eventually it begins examining you. By 10:30 the next morning, the copies from Victor Langley's suitcase covered Wolfe's office table in disciplined rows. Appointment schedules occupied one end, financial ledgers the other, and the correspondence lay between them like a diplomatic mission trying to prevent war. Wolfe was upstairs with the orchids. Saul Panzer had gone downtown to continue tracing North Harbor advisory. I had been assigned the noble duty of comparing dates, initials, and handwritten corrections until either a pattern appeared or my eyesight resigned. Most of the handwritten notes were supposedly Langley's. His writing was narrow, angular, and impatient. He crossed his T's with short strokes and made the lower loop of a G look like a hook. Other notes had been attributed to clerks, accountants, and unidentified assistants. They appeared in blue, black, and occasionally green ink. At 11:12 I found 3 different men who all formed the capital R in exactly the same peculiar way. The first appeared beside a March meeting. Revised location. Use private entrance. The second stood in the margin of a July ledger. Received and verified. The third appeared beneath an October memorandum. Second guest approved copy only. The handwriting looked different at first, because the writer had changed and pressure. One sample leaned forward, one stood nearly upright, and one was blockier. But each capital R began with a long downward stroke, returned halfway up, and ended in a short hook curling inward. The lowercase p also had a flat top. The final letter of every sentence rose slightly above the line. I gathered 7 pages and carried them to my desk. When Wolfe entered at 11:30, I was using a magnifying lens borrowed from his drawer. He stopped beside his chair. "What are you doing?" "Developing respect for penmanship. That would be an unexpected achievement." I placed the pages before him. "These notes are supposed to come from several sources. I think one man wrote all of them." Wolfe sat and examined the samples. He took longer than I had, which did not mean he was slower. "The variations are deliberate," he said. That was my thought. "You occasionally have one." He rang for beer and instructed me to telephone Inspector Kramer. Kramer arrived an hour later with a handwriting expert named Arthur Kenyon, a small dry man who handled paper as though it might bruise. Kenyon studied the documents under a lamp, measured letter angles, compared spacing, and produced photographs enlarged beyond the dignity of the alphabet. He agreed that the disputed notes came from one writer. Kramer planted his cigar in the corner of his mouth. "Who?" Kenyon removed another folder from his case. "You supplied samples from all 4 principal witnesses. The strongest match is Douglas Pierce." He placed a letter written by Pierce beside one of the altered ledger notes. The capital R had the same inward hook. The P had the same flattened top. Even the distance between words repeated. Kramer turned toward me. "Where is Pierce?" "At his office, unless honesty has caused him to move." 20 minutes later, I was in a police car with Kramer and Pearlie Stebbins. We found Pierce behind a desk large enough to defend a border. His office walls were lined with law books, framed certificates, and photographs of judges who looked disappointed in the entire human race. Pierce rose when we entered. "Inspector, Mr. Goodwin." Kramer placed the disputed pages on his desk. "You wrote these?" Pierce glanced at them. "Some appear familiar. All of them are familiar to the same hand." Pierce did not touch the papers. "What exactly are you alleging?" "That you altered records before they were packed in Langley's suitcase." "I made corrections at Victor's request." "What corrections?" "Dates, meeting locations, financial references." "Why disguise your handwriting?" "I did not disguise it." Kramer handed him Kenyon's report. Pierce read the first page. His expression did not change, but his right hand closed around the edge of his desk. I said, 3 styles, 1 writer. You varied the slope and pressure. That required effort. Pierce sat. "Very well. Victor asked me to organize certain records. He wanted the corrections to appear as though they had accumulated naturally." "Why?" Kramer demanded. "Because he intended the archive to protect him." "From whom?" He would not say. That was not enough for Kramer. "Start at the beginning." Pierce folded his hands. "About 6 weeks ago, Victor came to my office with copies of financial transactions. He believed someone close to him had diverted money from several investment accounts. The theft had been concealed through holding companies, artificial consulting fees, and transfers between properties. How much? Victor estimated more than $2 million. Who could do it? Pierce hesitated. Kramer leaned over the desk. "You are an attorney, not a priest. Your client is dead." "Thomas Reed," Pierce said. The name hung in the room without surprising anyone. Pierce continued. "Reed controlled the daily movement of funds. He had authority to transfer money within limits and access to Langley's private account structure. Victor had deliberately divided his finances, so no advisor knew everything, but Reed knew enough to exploit the gaps." "Did Langley confront him?" I asked. "Not immediately. He wanted proof. The original ownership records, those were part of another matter. Victor had several secrets in motion at once. That was his habit. The stolen money was linked to the waterfront properties and the warehouse, because the shell companies used both as cover." Kramer pointed to the papers. "Why were these put in the suitcase?" Victor said he needed insurance. If Reed destroyed the original banking records, the archive would show the pattern of meetings and transactions. It would also prove that others had been involved, knowingly or otherwise. "Others meaning Hale, Bennett, and you?" "Yes. You helped Langley blackmail his associates. Pierce's voice hardened. I helped my client preserve evidence. By falsifying documents? By organizing them, I said, and removing names. Pierce looked at me. Victor ordered that the second guest remain unidentified. Who was the second guest? I cannot say. Kramer slapped one palm on the desk. You can and you will. I never knew the real name. You attended several meetings. The person was never present when I was admitted. That was slippery, even for a lawyer. You prepared documents for an invisible client? I asked. I prepared agreements for Victor. He met the other participants separately. Man or woman? Pierce shook his head. I heard a voice once through the study door. It was too faint to identify. What did the second guest possess? Original papers connected with the Langley collection. Victor believed those papers could expose his father's fraud. Later, he suspected the same person had learned about Reed's theft. That brought the two halves of the suitcase together. The old ownership scandal and the new financial fraud had intersected in one unidentified visitor. Kramer said, "Tell us about Tuesday night." I arrived at 7:30. After dinner, Victor asked me to bring the revised trust agreements into the study. He was agitated and repeatedly checked his watch. At 10:40, we reviewed the documents. What agreements? One placed several properties into a protective trust. Another transferred control of certain accounts away from Reed. Did Langley sign them? No. He said he would sign after midnight. Why after midnight? The second guest was bringing final proof of the theft. I asked. Did Reed know? Victor intended to confront him during the gathering, after the others left. Kramer narrowed his eyes. Then why invite everyone? To prevent Reed from suspecting the real purpose. Victor often mixed business discussions with social gatherings. Where was the suitcase? In the study closet. Kramer straightened. You saw it? Yes. Victor showed me the archive before dinner. The hidden compartment contained the meeting records. The 4 original folders were beside it. Did the suitcase contain the overcoat, gloves, bottle, and portrait? No. Those were added later. What did it contain? The archive and the 4 folders. Who, Victor? And now I assume whoever came after I left. Pierce claimed he departed at 11:06. At that time Langley was alive. Reed had already left the building. Ruth Bennett was preparing to leave, and Martin Hale was finishing his telephone call. Did you use the service elevator? I asked. No. Did you return later? No. Did Langley ask you to place the suitcase in the hallway? Pierce's composure cracked for the first time. The hallway? You knew it was found there. I read the newspapers. The newspapers did not report its exact location. He caught the mistake and went still. Kramer moved closer. How did you know? Victor told me what he intended. When? Earlier that evening. Pierce admitted that Langley planned to leave the suitcase near the lobby elevator if the confrontation went badly. He wanted the building manager to discover it and eventually call the police. Why not give it directly to you? Kramer asked. Because he no longer trusted me completely. That answer cost him something. Why? I asked. Because my signature appeared on documents Reed had used to move funds. Were you involved? Not knowingly. Langley believed otherwise. He believed everyone was capable of betrayal. Kramer took Pierce to headquarters for a formal statement. I returned to the brownstone with copies of the handwriting report and enough information to spoil Wolfe's lunch if presented badly. I waited until he had finished. At 2:30, Wolfe entered the office, settled behind his desk, and listened while I reported Pierce's admissions. When I finished, Wolfe said, Mr. Pierce lied about one matter and concealed another. Only 2? 2 of consequence. Which? He knew more about the second guest than he admitted. Also, Langley did not intend to leave the suitcase in the hallway himself. Pierce says he did. Langley was expecting to confront Reed after midnight. He required the suitcase as evidence. He would not first remove it from his study and display it downstairs. Maybe he planned to do it afterward. Then why tell Pierce beforehand? To frighten him? Possibly. But the suitcase appeared at 11:58. While Langley was either dying or already incapacitated, someone else moved it. The doorbell rang. It was Saul. He entered carrying a thin accounting folder and sat in the yellow chair. North Harbor Advisory belonged to Thomas Reed, he said. Directly, I asked. Through 2 nominees and a trust company. Reed created it 3 years ago. Money from Langley's accounts moved into North Harbor, then through Eastborough Storage and 4 other companies. Some returned as false profits. The rest vanished. How much? $2,480,000. Wolfe's lips tightened. Saul continued. Reed had help from a clerk at one bank, but only Reed could authorize the transfers without triggering Langley's internal controls. Did Pierce receive money? Wolfe asked. Fees, but no clear share of the theft. Hale's waterfront project received funds without his knowledge of the source. Bennett's gallery loan was also paid through one of Reed's companies. So Reed spread stolen money among Langley's associates, I said. That made all of them look involved. Precisely, Wolfe replied. It was another insurance policy. The telephone rang. Thomas Reed was calling from his office. His voice had lost its professional smoothness. I have been informed that Douglas Pierce accused me of theft, he said. He disclosed financial evidence, Wolfe replied. It is false. Then come here and correct it. Reed arrived within an hour. He refused the red leather chair and remained standing. Wolfe gave him the total Saul had found. $2,480,000, Wolfe said. It moved through companies you controlled. I acted under Langley's instructions. Produce those instructions. They were verbal. All of them? Victor avoided written authorization in sensitive matters. You previously claimed you did not know the owner of North Harbor. I was protecting client confidentiality. You were protecting yourself. Reed looked at Saul. How did you obtain these records? By finding them, Saul said. Wolfe continued. Langley discovered the theft. He withdrew the confidential files and arranged a private meeting. The second guest was to bring proof. He intended to remove your authority over his accounts. Reed's face had become grey. Pierce invented that. Pierce prepared the trust agreements. Then Pierce killed him, perhaps. But Pierce lacked control of the poison, the financial scheme, and the service arrangements at the warehouse. So did I. You controlled the warehouse. That proves nothing. It proves opportunity to alter the archive. Your knowledge of the building's service route proves more. Your reaction to the suitcase proves fear. Reed's hands opened and closed. I left at 10:51, he said. The cameras prove it. The main entrance camera proves you left. It does not prove you remained away. Reed stared at him. Wolfe said, a person could re-enter by the service door, use the service elevator, poison Langley, take the original files, and lower the suitcase after midnight. You have no image of me returning. No. Whoever returned knew how to avoid the camera. Reed laughed, once without humor. This is speculation. Then answer one question. Why was the suitcase left in the hallway? I do not know. You expected it to remain there, Mr. Goodwin observed that before you knew what it contained. I assumed it was evidence. You assumed it was safe. That landed. Reed took one step toward Wolfe's desk. I did not kill Victor Langley. Wolfe regarded him. You had the strongest financial motive, the necessary knowledge, and access to the structure used to conceal the theft. You are either the murderer or the person most carefully selected to appear as the murderer. Reed stopped. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Wolfe said, which is it? Reed turned and walked out without answering. I went to the hall and watched him take his coat. He fumbled once with the sleeve, recovered and left. Back in the office, Saul said, he is close to breaking. No, Wolfe replied. He is close to fleeing or attacking. Those are not the same. I sat at my desk. We have Pierce altering the records, Reed stealing the money, Langley preparing a confrontation, and the second guest bringing proof. That is nearly the whole structure. No, Wolfe said. We have the structure someone intended us to see. You still doubt Reed. I doubt simplicity. He looked toward the suitcase, which had been returned under seal, and stood beside the long table. If Reed killed Langley and stole the files, why preserve an archive that directs us toward him, to implicate everyone else? But the warehouse entries, shell company transactions, and altered notes lead most strongly to Reed. A competent thief would destroy them. Maybe he had no time. He had time to replace the files with an overcoat, gloves, copied letters, a portrait, and a rinsed poison bottle. He had time to lower the suitcase and position it precisely behind a column. He had time to imitate Langley's voice the next morning. Lack of time is inadequate. I considered it. Then someone wanted Reed blamed. Yes, Pierce, possibly. But the greater question remains. The hallway. Wolfe nodded. The suitcase was not merely hidden, it was displayed. Whoever placed it there wanted the guests to see it, the manager to fear it, and the police eventually to open it. Yet the killer also removed the pages identifying the second guest, to expose Reed and protect the visitor, or to make us believe that was the purpose. He rang for beer. Outside, late afternoon traffic rolled along West 35th Street. Inside, Victor Langley's edited archive waited beneath the office lights. We had found the hand that altered the records and the man whose theft those records exposed. But the most important act had no signature. Someone had carried Langley's insurance policy downstairs and placed it where it could not be ignored. Until Wolfe knew why, he did not consider the murder solved. Chapter 7. The Purpose of the Suitcase. The answer arrived at 8:40 in the morning wearing a porter's uniform and looking as though it would rather have stayed home. His name was George Bell. He had worked nights at the Hawthorne Apartments for 9 years, which was long enough to know the private habits of 86 tenants and wise enough not to discuss them without pressure. Inspector Kramer supplied the pressure. Bell sat in the red leather chair in Wolfe's office, cap in his hands. Kramer stood near the bookshelves. Pearlie Stebbins occupied the chair beside him. Pazza sat by the Globe and was at my desk with my notebook open. Wolfe had finished breakfast and his morning session in the plant rooms. A spray of orchids stood in a vase near the window. Their calm beauty seemed unfair to George Bell, who had been sweating since he entered. Wolfe regarded him. "You entered the Hawthorne lobby shortly before midnight on Tuesday," he said. Bell looked at Kramer. "I already told the police I was working in the basement." "You were in the basement until 11:57, Wolfe said. "Then you took the service stairs to the lobby." "How would you know that?" "The service elevator camera shows the doors opening at 11:54. The elevator remained at the lobby. Therefore, when you came upstairs 3 minutes later, you used the stairs." Bell wet his lips. "Maybe, not maybe. Why did you go to the lobby?" "I heard the service bell." "What service bell?" "The one beside the freight entrance. Delivery people use it after the side door is locked." "Who?" "I don't know. When I got there, nobody was outside." "What did you see inside?" Bell twisted his cap. Kramer said. "I saw only the suitcase," Wolfe asked. Bell stared at the floor. "I saw somebody behind the column. That was the first clean break we had received in 2 days." "What part of the person?" I asked. "A shoulder and the bottom of a coat. He moved when I came in." "Where did he go?" "Back toward the service corridor." "Did you follow?" Bell shook his head. "I figured it was a tenant. People in that building don't like being followed." "Did you recognize him?" "No." "Height?" "A little shorter than Mr. Goodwin. Thin." "Thomas Reed was a little shorter than me and thin." Wolfe said. "What happened next?" "I checked the side entrance. It was empty. When I came back, the suitcase was still there. The person was gone." "Why did you not report it?" "I thought it belonged to a guest. Then the doorman came in from helping a lady with her taxi, and I went back downstairs." "How long was the lobby occupied after that?" Bell thought. "Carl Ames stayed at the desk until midnight 30. Then Peter Sloane came down from the penthouse floor. After that, the night cleaner started on the marble. So the person behind the column could not return without being seen." "I suppose not." "Did anyone telephone the building desk?" "Yes, around 12:15. "Who?" "A man asked whether a brown suitcase had been found." Kramer straightened. "You never told us that." Bell looked miserable. "I forgot." "You forgot a call about the suitcase? I get calls all night." "What did you say?" Wolfe asked. "I said it was beside the elevator and asked for the caller's name." He hung up. Wolfe leaned back. The voice quiet, educated. He sounded like one of the business fellows who visited Mr. Langley. "Thomas Reed?" Bell shifted. "Could have been. Douglas Pierce? Could have been him too." That was not identification, but it was enough to establish purpose. Someone had placed the suitcase in the hall, been interrupted before taking it through the service exit, and later telephoned to learn whether it remained available. Wolfe asked one more question. "When did Mrs. Marsh learn of it?" "Just after 7 the next morning." The day porter reported it. She told everyone not to move it until she found the owner. That closed the door on easy recovery. Once the manager began questioning residents and staff, anyone claiming the suitcase would have to explain how it entered the building and why it had been abandoned. Bell was dismissed after Kramer promised another conversation downtown. When the door closed, I turned to Wolfe. So the suitcase was never intended for discovery. Not in the lobby, Wolfe said. Its contents were intended for discovery under controlled circumstances, if Langley was harmed. The hallway was merely an interrupted route. Kramer frowned. Then why send Mrs. Marsh the warning card, telling her to leave it there? To prevent her from opening it or surrendering it to the police before the killer could devise another means of recovery. The card was left in her locked office. Reed knew Langley possessed a key. He had access to the penthouse after the murder and could have taken it. Kramer moved his cigar from one corner of his mouth to the other. You are calling Reed the killer. I am approaching the privilege. Wolfe turned to Saul. The restored sequence? Saul opened a folder. The police laboratory had examined the cut edges, page jibs, carbon impressions, staple holes, and ledger totals. By comparing surviving copies from banks, attorneys, and Langley's business office, Saul had reconstructed portions of 5 missing pages. Everyone involved Thomas Reed. One missing ledger page recorded transfers authorized by Reed through North Harbor Advisory. Another listed as private warehouse meeting between Langley, Reed, and the second guest. A missing memorandum described forged consulting expenses approved through Reed's office. The torn September page included the sentence, TR, informed that complete disclosure will follow if funds are not restored. The final missing schedule placed Reed at Building C 2 nights before Langley withdrew the 4 confidential folders. Kramer read the copies. Why leave pages around them? Because Reed removed only those that named him directly, I said. Wolfe nodded. He worked rapidly. He took the 4 original folders, then searched the archive for explicit references to himself. He did not understand that absence can be more eloquent than ink. Kramer paced once across the office. Pierce altered the documents. At Langley's instruction, Wolfe said. Pierce's changes disguised the source of the archive and protected the second guest. They did not remove Reed's name. Reed did that after Langley was poisoned. What about the visible objects? Purley asked. The coat, gloves, portrait, and copied letters. Diversions, Wolfe replied. Reed added them to suggest an old family crime connected with Margaret Vale. The empty poison bottle was included to make the suitcase appear to belong to the poisoner if discovered, but it had been wiped and rinsed. Expected to retrieve the case. If forced to abandon it permanently, he hoped its contents would direct attention toward the old ownership scandal and the unknown second guest. I said, but the hidden archive led straight to his theft. Not until Miss Goodwin noticed the handwriting. Saul traced the companies, and the missing pages were reconstructed. Reed believed he had removed the direct evidence. Wolfe reached for the stack of financial reports. Langley discovered that more than $2 million had been diverted from his accounts. Reed used shell companies to create false investments, consulting charges, storage expenses, and property transfers. He distributed portions through ventures connected with Hale, Bennett, and Pierce so that any inquiry would stain all of them. Insurance, I said. Yes, Reed imitated Langley's methods. Each man protected himself by creating evidence against others. Kramer stopped beside Wolfe's desk. You still need the murder. I have it. A theory is not a murder. Then listen. Wolfe settled deeper into his chair. Langley summoned Reed to the gathering because he intended to confront him after the other guests departed. The second guest was to bring original proof of the fraudulent transfers. Langley had already prepared new trust documents removing Reed's authority. Pierce says Langley did not sign them, Kramer said. He expected to sign after midnight when the proof arrived. Reed left at 10:51 through the main entrance. He returned through the side entrance after the other guests were gone. The camera did not catch him. He controlled the warehouse, knew the Hawthorne service route, and had visited often enough to know the camera positions. He used the partly open side door and the service elevator. What about the poison? The aconitine was administered during the gathering. Kramer shook his head. Then why return? To make certain Langley died, obtain the original files, and remove the suitcase. Wolfe picked up the laboratory report. Reed knew Langley drank mineral water. During the library discussion, he handled the bottle or glass. The poison was placed inside the cap of a fresh bottle, not in the water itself. When Langley opened it later, the aconitine washed into the drink. The bottle found in the kitchen? I asked. One of several. Reed expected it to be discarded with the others. The small bottle in the suitcase had carried the concentrated poison and was later rinsed. Kramer said, "Where did Reed get aconitine?" "Through North Harbor Advisory." "Saul?" "Saul supplied it. A pharmaceutical importer had sold a small quantity of aconite extract to a laboratory owned by one of Reed's shell companies. The purchase had been described as research material for pest control at warehouse properties. Pearlie whistled softly. Wolfe continued. Reed returned near midnight. Langley was already weakened, perhaps unable to rise. Reed demanded the original proof. Whether Langley surrendered it or Reed found it in the study is immaterial. Reed took the 4 folders and altered the suitcase. Why not carry it out immediately? Kramer asked. He intended to, but a large suitcase would be conspicuous in the elevator and main lobby. He lowered it by the service elevator, hid behind the decorative column, and waited for a clear path to the side entrance. Then Bell appeared. Yes, Reed abandoned the suitcase and retreated into the service corridor. He may have gone upstairs again, or left through another exit without it. By the time he returned, the doorman and cleaner occupied the lobby. He called at 12:15, I said, to determine whether it had been moved. The following morning, Mrs. Marsh began making inquiries. Reed could not claim it without linking himself to Langley's penthouse after the gathering. So he put the warning card in her office, Kramer said. To delay official action, he hoped for an opportunity to recover it privately. No opportunity came. Each hour increased the danger, but removing it after attention had fixed upon it was impossible. I looked at the security photographs spread on my desk. For 3 days the suitcase had appeared ownerless. In fact, its owner had been watching it. Kramer was not entirely satisfied. Reed could have hired someone to steal it, and risked another witness? No, he had already been interrupted once. Also, he believed the most damaging pages were gone. He hoped the case would eventually be discarded, stored, or opened without the hidden archive being recognized. But Mrs. Marsh came here, a possibility he did not foresee. That pleased me more than it should have. Kramer said, why imitate Langley's voice Wednesday morning? To delay discovery of the body. Reed needed time to transfer funds, destroy records, and establish distance from the murder. Who made the call? Reed, from the penthouse. The valet had been sent away. Mrs. Marsh heard only a few words and accepted the voice she expected. I said, then Reed returned Wednesday morning too, or never left the building after midnight until later that morning. The service areas offer several unused rooms. Kramer studied Wolfe. Enough of it. Enough for an arrest? Not yet.
Mr.
Reed will deny Bell's uncertain identification, the telephone voice, and the poison purchase. The financial theft gives motive, not homicide. We require him to place himself behind the column or reveal knowledge only the killer possesses. How? Wolfe reached for the telephone. By offering him the missing page. Kramer stared. You do not have it. No, but Mr. Reed does not know that. Wolfe instructed me to call Martin Hale, Ruth Bennett, Douglas Pierce, Thomas Reed, Eleanor Marsh, and Edward Finch. They were to come to the brownstone at 9 that evening. Kramer and Pearlie would attend. Saul would remain out of sight in the front room. What are we telling Reed? I asked. That a complete carbon copy of the final warehouse memorandum has been found behind the suitcase lining. There was no carbon. Mr. Reed cannot be certain of that. Kramer grunted. And if he refuses to come, he will come. A thief who has spent 3 days watching a suitcase cannot ignore the possibility that it has spoken. I began making the calls. Outside, New York moved toward evening, with its usual indifference inside. The brown suitcase stood beside the long table, under police seal. It had not been left as a message, a warning, or a gift to the authorities. It had been abandoned for less than a minute. That minute had ruined Thomas Reed. Chapter 8. The gathering in Wolfe's office at 8:57 that evening. Wolfe's office contained enough suspicion to poison a reservoir. Martin Hale occupied the red leather chair, where he looked too large and too angry for the furniture. Ruth Bennett sat beside the bookshelves, composed but pale. Douglas Pierce had selected a chair near the globe and arranged himself in it, with the care of a lawyer, preparing to deny something under oath. Thomas Reed stood near the window. That was his mistake, though he did not know it yet. A seated man may hide trembling knees. A standing man must trust them. Eleanor Marsh sat near my desk. Edward Finch, Victor Langley's valet, had taken the smallest chair and looked grateful that no one had accused him during the previous 5 minutes. George Bell, the night porter, waited near the door with his cap in both hands. Inspector Kramer stood to Wolfe's right. Pearlie Stebbins was near the hall, where he could block an exit without appearing to try. Saul Panzer remained out of sight in the front room. The brown suitcase stood on the long table. Its locks were open. Its lid was closed. Wolfe entered at 9 exactly and crossed to his custom-made chair. He lowered himself into it, adjusted his coat, and looked slowly around the room. His eyes stopped briefly on Reed, then moved on. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "are all present? One more is expected." Reed turned from the window. "Who?" Wolfe ignored him. The doorbell rang. I went to the hall and admitted a woman of perhaps 27, slender, dark-haired, and dressed in a plain blue coat. She carried a narrow leather folder against her chest. Her face was controlled, but the effort required was visible. I took her coat and brought her into the office. Ruth Bennett stared at her. Douglas Pierce rose halfway from his chair. Thomas Reed did not move at all. Wolfe said, "Miss Helen Vale, you may sit beside Mrs. Marsh." She did. Kramer looked at Wolfe. "Vale, the daughter of Margaret Vale," Wolfe said. The name disturbed the room. Hale frowned. Bennett lowered her eyes. Pierce sat again. Reed's right hand closed against the curtain behind him. Helen Vale placed the leather folder on her lap. Wolfe leaned back. "We are assembled to consider the death of Victor Langley and the history of a brown suitcase. The two matters are connected, though not in the manner intended by the murderer." Hale shifted impatiently. "You told me you knew who killed Victor." "I do." "Then say it." "I shall proceed in my own fashion." That quieted Hale, because Wolfe had not raised his voice. When Wolfe is loud, a man may challenge him. When he is quiet, a sensible man waits. Victor Langley, Wolfe began, was wealthy, suspicious, and accustomed to protecting himself with evidence damaging to others. His father had acquired several valuable paintings through false ownership claims. Margaret Vale, then employed as his secretary, discovered the fraud and preserved original shipping records, letters, and bills of sale. Helen Vale's hands tightened around the folder. Margaret Vale attempted to expose him, Wolfe continued. She was threatened, discredited, and paid to remain silent. She did not destroy the original evidence. Before her death, she gave it to her daughter. Kramer looked at Helen. "You had the papers?" "Yes," she said. Her voice was low but steady. "My mother told me to use them only when I could prove the rightful claims." Wolfe nodded. "Miss Vale approached Victor Langley last year. She did not demand personal enrichment. She demanded that disputed paintings be restored or that their value be placed in a trust for the lawful heirs." Ruth Bennett said, "Victor told me someone was blackmailing him." "He preferred that word," Helen replied. Wolfe lifted a hand. "Langley concealed Miss Vale's identity in his schedules by calling her the second guest. He used the title because she attended meetings after his ordinary business visitors departed. Mr. Pierce prepared documents, but was not permitted to meet her. Miss Bennett attended preliminary discussions concerning the disputed paintings. Mr. Reed arranged payments and controlled the warehouse where records were examined." Reed spoke for the first time. "This has nothing to do with Victor's murder." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "It has everything to do with how his murderer was discovered." Wolfe indicated the suitcase. Langley's meetings with Miss Vale revealed irregularities beyond the old art scandal. Payments supposedly intended for settlements had moved through shell corporations. Storage charges, consulting fees, property investments, and transfers to private accounts had consumed more than $2 million. Hale looked at Reed. Your companies. Reed's face remained stiff. Langley authorized those transfers. No, Wolfe said. You relied upon fragmented authority. Langley divided his affairs among advisors. Hale knew the waterfront properties, but not the consulting companies. Miss Bennet knew the gallery loans, but not their source. Mr. Pierce knew the trust documents, but not the movement of cash. You alone saw enough of the structure to steal from it. Reed stepped away from the window. This is accusation without proof. Saul entered from the front room carrying 2 folders. Proof is often improved by organization, Wolfe said. Salt placed the folders on Wolfe's desk. One contained the banking records tracing North Harbor Advisory through Reed's nominees. The other held the reconstructed suitcase pages. Wolfe continued. Langley discovered the fraud 6 weeks before his death. He instructed Mr. Pierce to assemble an archive of schedules, correspondence, ledger entries, and meeting notes. Mr. Pierce altered the appearance of several annotations so the papers would seem to have accumulated from different sources. Pierce inclined his head. At Langley's instruction. Yes, you acted foolishly, but not murderously. Kramer grunted but did not interrupt. Langley placed the archive in the false bottom of the suitcase. He also withdrew 4 confidential folders from secure storage. They contained original financial records proving Mr. Reed's theft. Reed said, "Those folders have never been found." Wolfe looked at him. "No, they have not." The answer appeared to reassure Reed. That was the second mistake. Wolfe turned to Helen Vale. "You were to bring the final ownership documents to Langley's penthouse at 11:30 on Tuesday night." "Yes. Why did you not arrive?" "I received a telephone call shortly after 10:30. The caller said Mr. Langley had changed the meeting to the waterfront warehouse." "Did you recognize the voice?" "No. I had spoken with Mr. Reed only twice. The voice may have been his." She opened the leather folder and removed a note. "When I reached the warehouse, no one was there. This was beneath the office door. I took it from her and handed it to Kramer. It contained one typed sentence. 'The settlement is postponed.'" Wolfe said. Mr. Reed prevented Miss Vale from reaching the penthouse. He knew Langley expected her and feared the proof she carried. He telephoned her before leaving the gathering at 10:51. Reed shook his head. "You cannot prove I made that call. The telephone company can. The call originated from a public booth opposite the Hawthorne. A witness remembers a man in a dark blue overcoat using it at 10:36. A dark coat is not proof. No, but it accompanies proof well." Wolfe turned his attention to the others. Dinner ended near 10. Langley and his guests moved to the library. Mr. Hale argued with him. Miss Bennet learned her financing had been withdrawn. Mr. Pierce reviewed trust documents in the study. Mr. Reed remained near the table holding Langley's bottles of mineral water. Reed said, "I never served him a drink. You did not need to." Langley opened the bottle himself. Wolfe picked up the laboratory report. Aconitine was placed inside the metal cap of an unopened bottle. When Langley twisted the cap free, the poison entered the water. The bottle appeared sealed because the cap had been removed earlier with a tool that left only faint marks. Kramer nodded. His laboratory had confirmed those marks that afternoon. Mr. Reed, Wolfe continued, had acquired aconite extract through a laboratory owned by North Harbor Advisory. The purchase was falsely described as material for warehouse pest control. Reed looked at Kramer. "A corporation purchased it. That does not prove I used it." "Then let us continue." Wolfe folded his hands across his middle. Langley drank the poisoned water after the gathering. The effects began with numbness and weakness, followed by an irregular heartbeat. Mr. Reed left through the main entrance at 10:51, so the camera and doorman would record his departure. He then telephoned Miss Vale, waited until the other guests had gone, and returned through the service entrance. Edward Finch stirred. Wolfe looked at him. "You were sent to obtain medicine at 11:20. "Yes, by whom?" "Mr. Reed told me Mr. Langley had asked for it." I believed him. Thus the penthouse was unguarded. Reed said, "Finch never told the police that." Finch stared at him. I was frightened. "You said I would be blamed if I mentioned it." The room became very still. Reed realized what he had said a fraction too late. Kramer moved one step toward him. "How did you know what Finch had not told us?" "You assumed too accurately." Wolfe said. Reed turned back toward Wolfe. This is a trick, certainly. Facts require assistance when a liar refuses them. Wolfe continued before Reed could recover. When you returned, Langley was alive but helpless. You demanded the files. Whether he told you where they were, or you found them in the study closet, is unimportant. You took the 4 folders, opened the suitcase, and examined the hidden archive. Wolfe tapped the reconstructed pages. You removed every sheet that directly identified your meetings, authorizations, and transfers. You believed the remaining documents were harmless because they mentioned the second guest more often than they mentioned you. Reed's face had lost its color, but you misunderstood the nature of evidence, Wolfe said. The gaps formed a pattern. Every mispage stood beside an entries concerning your companies, your warehouse, or your transfer authority. Your effort to erase your name underlined it. Hale gave a short, bitter laugh. You stole from all of us and made it look as if we helped. Reed snapped. You took the money. I invested money you told me was clean, Ruth Bennett said. So did I. Wolfe raised his voice slightly. Please. Mr. Reed's financial crimes can be distributed later. He pointed toward the suitcase. After removing the folders and pages, Mr. Reed added objects intended to create a false history. Margaret Vale's portrait and copied letters suggested that the case belonged to someone seeking vengeance for the old art fraud. The rinsed poison bottle connected that imaginary avenger to Langley's death. The unmarked overcoat and gloves provided no identity at all. I said, then he tried to carry the suitcase out through the service entrance. Yes. He lowered it in the service elevator shortly before midnight. The hallway camera was partly blocked by a decorative column. He placed the suitcase beside the table while checking whether the path to the side door was clear. George Bell swallowed. Mr. Bell entered from the basement stairs, Wolfe said. Mr. Reed retreated into the service corridor. The interruption lasted less than a minute, but it was decisive. The doorman returned. The cleaner began work. The lobby was no longer empty. Kramer said, Reed telephoned the desk at 12:15 to ask whether the suitcase had been found. Yes. He hoped it had been moved somewhere he could enter privately. Instead, it remained in public view. Why not retrieve it the next morning? Hale asked. Mrs. Marsh had already questioned the staff and posted notices, claiming it would have connected Mr. Reed with the penthouse after his recorded departure. Eleanor Marsh said, and the card left in my office? Mr. Reed took Langley's management key. He placed the warning there Wednesday morning after imitating Langley's voice on the telephone. He needed you to leave the suitcase untouched while he sought another opportunity. Reed shook his head. You have constructed a story from accidents. Wolfe looked at Saul. Saul removed a single cream-colored sheet from the second folder and handed it to Wolfe. This, Wolfe said, is the carbon copy discovered behind the suitcase lining. It records Langley's final warehouse meeting and names the person responsible for the transfers. Reed stared at the paper. There was no carbon copy, he said. No one moved. Wolfe placed the blank sheet on his desk. I agree. Reed's mouth opened, but no words came. Kramer advanced another step. How did you know? Reed looked toward the door. Pearlie Stebbins was already in front of it. Wolfe's voice remained calm. You knew there was no carbon because you examined every page, removed the original, and destroyed it. No innocent person could possess that certainty. Reed's shoulders dropped. For several seconds he said nothing. The room waited. Even Hale had enough sense not to speak. Then Reed said, Victor would have ruined me. Kramer's hand moved inside his coat, but Wolfe lifted one finger. Reed continued, his voice uneven. He called me a thief as if he'd never stolen anything. He EU'd everyone. Hale, Pierce, Bennett, me. He made us sign papers we did not understand and moved money through accounts no one could follow. You followed them, Wolfe said. Yes, and diverted them. At first it was temporary. The warehouse project needed cash. Then I replaced one transfer with another. Victor discovered the gaps and began threatening me. So you poisoned him, Kramer said. Reed looked at the floor. I put the extract in the bottle cap during dinner. He always opened a fresh bottle in the study before reading at night. I thought his heart would fail. The doctor had warned him before. You returned after leaving, Kramer said. Yes. Where are the 4 folders? I burned 2 at the warehouse. The other two are in a safe deposit box under the name Charles Norton. Saul wrote the name down. The missing pages? Kramer asked. Burned with the files. The warning card? I placed it in Mrs. Marsh's office Wednesday morning. And you answered her call from the penthouse? Yes. Kramer took a pair of handcuffs from his pocket. Reed looked once at the brown suitcase. I should have carried it out when Bell left, Wolfe said. The lobby was occupied. I could have found another way. No. By then you were trapped by your own caution. You had designed the case to conceal your axe, but feared touching it once others had noticed it. Kramer stepped behind Reed and fastened the cuffs. Thomas Reed offered no resistance. The confession had emptied him more completely than fear. Kramer instructed Pearlie to take him outside. Before following, he looked at Wolfe. You took your time. I took what was required. Kramer glanced at the blank cream sheet. That was Mr. Goodwin has told me you admire effective methods. I do not admire yours. You use them often. Kramer left without replying. The rest departed in stages. Hale went first, muttering about attorneys and accountants. Ruth Bennett paused to speak with Helen Vale about the disputed paintings. Douglas Pierce promised to cooperate with the recovery process, which was his way of saying he hoped to avoid prosecution. Edward Finch and George Bell left together. Eleanor Marsh was last. She stood near Wolfe's desk with one hand on her gloves. I brought you a suitcase, she said. You brought me a question, Wolfe replied. The suitcase merely occupied space. She almost smiled. Then she thanked him and went. Helen Vale remained for a moment. What will happen to the paintings? She asked. The originals in your possession, combined with Mr. Reed's recovered files, should compel restitution. My mother waited her whole life. Yes, Wolfe said. Justice is frequently late and rarely apologizes. She nodded and followed Mrs. Marsh. At last the office was empty except for Wolfe, Fritz and me. Fritz entered to collect the empty glasses and announced that a dish of cold chicken and herbs was available if Wolfe required restoration after dealing with the police. Wolfe required it. I looked at the brown suitcase on the long table. All that trouble over a suitcase. Wolfe closed his eyes. No, Archie. The trouble arose because a murderer believed he could carry away the truth. He overlooked a simple fact. What fact? Truth, unlike luggage, rarely stays where one leaves it. He opened his eyes and reached for the beer bottle. I considered reminding him that truth had stayed in our office for most of the week and had required Saul, Kramer, a handwriting expert, 2 laboratories, a night porter, and a fake carbon copy to make it useful. I decided against it. For once the old genius had earned the last word.